Come on, don't be an asshole. Hey, you need this. Just get me the fuck out of here!
Hey, what's up guys? It's Jinx here, back at it to have a look at the recently released Resident Evil 2 Remake. That's right, you heard me, Remake. The original Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998. Go watch my previous video as I review the original version of the game in anticipation of the remake releasing. I'll get this out of the way right at the start. This game is amazing, 11 out of 10. Buy this game now, stop this video, buy the game, play it, come back and watch the video. This game is a landmark event for the horror genre of games. Don't be a baby, even if you don't like horror games, get this game and play it. I don't want this game just to be successful, I want it to crush. I want the success of this game to ring out through the industry, to show publishers like EA that they were wrong to scrap developers like Visceral Entertainment, the guys who made the amazing series like Dead Space, that it was a bad idea and their poor marketing and shoving shitty multiplayer modes and microtransactions into the games that killed them, and not the series and genre itself. I also want companies like Konami to shuffle their decaying corpses off of great franchises like Silent Hill and give them to developers that can make those games great. A Resident Evil 2 as a base game is well worth the entry fee even at full price. If you have any interest in horror games, please support this title. It oozes with polish, and you can tell the team who made this game must have had a blast working on it. Now that I'm done thoroughly bludgeoning you with my opinion, let's get down to the review. The original Resident Evil 1 remake was basically a shot-for-shot remake with new graphics added on top. Now, the Resident Evil 2 game doesn't follow the same path. Instead, it takes inspiration from one of the series' most respected entries, Resident Evil 4. It takes some of the best parts that were in that game, the over-the-shoulder camera and the freedom of movement, and threw out all the worst parts, the over-reliance on comedic value and the focus on the action elements. While they borrow a lot mechanically from Resident Evil 4, the Resident Evil 2 remake is Resident Evil 2 through and through. They managed to land the perfect balance of keeping old mechanics and sprucing them up, and adding entirely new things that were never in the original game. The best part of this remake is Capcom has finally managed to get away from the action focus they've been taking the series on for quite some time. While Resident Evil 7 was a good scary game, it still seemed to lose its way further into the campaign. Say goodbye to roundhouse kicking villagers in the jaw and punching boulders into a volcano. Resident Evil 2 brings the series back to horror, and in a great way. From this point forward in the review, expect spoilers, so if you want to go in blind, and which I highly recommend you do, stop this video now, buy the game, play it, then come back and watch this video. If I haven't convinced you yet that Resident Evil 2 is a great game, and that you should go buy it right now, hopefully by the end of this video, I've made you change your mind. Alright, let's get to it. Resident Evil 2, for those not in the know, is a classic survival horror game released on the PlayStation 1. This new remake comes almost 2 decades after the original. You play as Leon Kennedy, a rookie cop who's about to have the worst day on the job, or Claire Redfield, sister to Resident Evil 1 protagonist Chris Redfield. She's lost contact with her brother and decides to visit him at work. The two meet at the start of the game, having had a rather violent introduction to the local population. They both decide the police station is the best place to go, as they're both headed there anyways. And if anywhere is a good shelter, let's go to the place with guns. They arrive to find the police station hasn't fared any better. They resolve to find an escape route while exploring the mostly infested police station, unraveling the events that have unfolded along the way, while doing their best to avoid the horrors that lurk around every corner. The best part of this game and the main draw are the zombies that you need to avoid while exploring. The game has managed to make slow-moving zombies scary as hell, something I thought that would be impossible in today's market, dominated by fast-paced action shooters. I never imagined they'd manage to get a shambling corpse to elicit so much dread. The zombies in this game are on point. They are slow, they fumble around, but they are relentless. Shoot a sucker in the knee, and he doesn't keel over and await a roundhouse kick to the face, he keeps coming. Shoot them in the head, they keep coming. You knock them down, you don't even know if they're dead, they keep coming. Tear their legs off, they keep coming. Tear their arms off, they'll bite at you with nothing but their nubs. Combined with the scarce resources you're given throughout the game, You never really know when to confront a zombie and how to confront a zombie, making every single one a possibly deadly encounter. I've always been a giant fan of the slow zombie and the way they're built. In Resident Evil 2, they give a pretty realistic view on how a swarm of these guys could totally overrun a well-armed group, let alone a police station. These zombies are the perfect encapsulation of the traditional zombie. Romero would be proud. Fun fact, Romero actually directed a commercial for the original Resident Evil 2. It only aired in Japan, but Capcom liked it so much, they asked him to write a movie script. Sadly, Capcom passed on his script, as they were not fans of his interpretation of the game. It was said to be very faithful to the original Resident Evil 1, based in the Spencer Mansion focusing on Jill and Chris. It's a shame they dumped Romero's idea. He was the godfather of zombies after all. Instead, they picked Paul W.S. Anderson to make the movie. Whether you actually like those movies or not, that's up to you, but they weren't good Resident Evil movies. Now, while the zombies are a vital linchpin of the game's formula, they aren't the only enemy we'll be facing while we explore the police department. Lickers are back, and in traditional form, these fleshy guys sport mean claws and a lance-like tongue that they aren't afraid to use. If they hear you, better hope you got an escape plan, as these guys are robust as hell and should not be taken lightly. Only fight these guys as a last resort, as a scuffle with them can leave you low on health and scrambling to find more ammo. Thankfully, they're blind as a bat, so if you don't run, you can actually walk almost right past them as long as you don't bump into them. Another enemy that was introduced in the original Resident Evil 2 is back with the Ivies, but they've been changed drastically. Instead of simple living plants, these are plants that seem to have taken over corpses and become near immortal zombies. These guys are real slow, but pose great risk late game. With the ability to outright one-shot you unless you're packing a sub-weapon, these guys are reminiscent of the regenerators from Resident Evil 4, as they sport weak points on their bodies that can temporarily disable them if you shoot them. Yeah, you heard me. Temporarily. The only way to be rid of these guys for good is to expend a sizable amount of flame-based ammunition until they're totally charcoal. Only appearing in a few key areas of the game, they make a final leg of the game pretty harrowing. While the enemy roster isn't as robust as the original game, I find the way they use the zombies is great. And keeping the zombies the main focus of attention really lets them shine. Now, if you were to ask me, I don't think I would change any. Wait, do you guys hear that? What's happening? Last but not least, let's not forget the meme lord himself, Mr. X. This bad boy shows up relatively early in the game and is a lingering threat throughout the entire game. Fighting him is pointless, as the best you can do is bring him to his knees for a few moments. Give him a minute to collect his thoughts, and he'll be hot on your trail once again. I find one of the best design choices they made in the entire game was making Mr. X an ever-looming presence. Once introduced, he will tirelessly pursue you, and with the exception of a handful of safe rooms, he can and will follow you through the entire precinct. His booming footsteps give you a fair warning of his nearby presence. But god damn if they don't stress me the hell out every time I hear them. It's amazing design, and it really helps dash any tedium you might have felt backtracking in areas you have already explored, as you feel rewarded for knowing your way around the precinct. His constant harassment is made all the better when the areas you traversed aren't always as safe as you may have assumed. Rooms you may have cleared have had zombies reinfest them through the halls, through windows you failed to board up, or may have seen other threats, such as lickers, move in since your last visit. Everything around Mr. X and his design is great, and his presence becomes a natural way to speed player progression and adds new avenues for potential scares in any area of the game you've previously felt safe retreading. Speaking of delivery methods for scares, the areas themselves are amazingly detailed, with the precinct itself, like in the original game, being the most interesting and scariest area of the game. Threats lurk around every corner, and the design of the precinct leave tons of room for surprises that more often than not the game takes great advantage of. To throw veterans off the scent, they've changed the location of a few major scares from the original game, so even a hardened veteran gets a chance to once again fall out of his chair, huddle in a corner, when classic moments are remixed seamlessly into new areas of the game. Another mechanic they lift from the original game is a unique A and B scenario for each character, giving you up to 4 potential storylines depending on who you begin the game with. Each character has their own unique plot beats that happen regardless of which scenario you're in, but depending on who you start with can affect some characters that Claire or Leon get to meet up with. Regardless of who you decide to play with, both characters follow the same general path. They start out in the precinct, wind up in the sewers, and eventually in the Nest lab. While the police department has seen some pretty sweeping changes, it's mostly recognizable from the original game. The sewers and the lab have seen some pretty extensive changes, and they're almost unrecognizable from the original game. And in my opinion, this is a good thing. One of the weakest parts of the original game is that as soon as you leave the precinct, the new areas you find just aren't very interesting. While to an extent this is true in the remake as well, as I find the precinct to be the most interesting and well crafted of the areas. At least the lab isn't an utterly drab mess anymore. There's plenty of detail, and it definitely looks like things actually went bad down in the labs. Overall, I find the game has great pacing and enough variety in the environments to keep people on their toes through multiple playthroughs. Again, the game tends to feel rewarding the more you know about the map, especially on a second playthrough. However, on a second playthrough, they actually change the location of some items and the solution of many of the puzzles around to keep you on your toes. It's not much, but it's enough to get you go through the same areas in a different fashion. One thing I do miss, however, is the variety of memos and notes you would find strewn about giving exposition dumps and other lore tidbits. They still exist, mind you, but they aren't as focused on lore as they are to be a vehicle for puzzle solutions. If the developers were afraid to let players stop and read memos, they could have gone the direction of Dead Space route and left tape recordings or so much strewn about the police department that you could listen to while exploring. But even without these notes, the game does a well enough job explaining the surface level story. But beyond getting that, you're going to have to go looking at wikis and previously existing lore to see what's going on further below in the Resident Evil lore. I had high hopes for the free Ghost Survivors DLC that they recently released to have some backstory to them. Sadly, with one exception, these stories presented of the Ghost Survivors are non-canon and do nothing to explain any missing lore threads. They all serve as more arcade-style speedruns. While fun, I do wish they would have given players looking for a deeper story something to latch onto. Perhaps in further DLC we can get something like this. Come on, Capcom, you know you wanna. The main characters, Claire and Leon, are both well fleshed out, and I thoroughly enjoyed the updated design they took with both of their characters. Both of them come off as young and inexperienced. Often when confronted with enemies, they'll murmur to themselves, and more often than not, after I was finished telling a zombie to just die already, I would hear Claire echo my sentiments.
You asshole.
Both Leon and Claire have one companion that they find throughout the game that are actually playable. With Leon you'll find Ada, a secret agent. As Ada, you'll do a quick exploration segment, with a gimmick tool designed to toggle electronic device panels. While certainly an interesting concept, it didn't really move the needle for me as it was pretty similar to the main character's gameplay with just a little bit more busywork piled on. Sherry, however, has a stellar segment where you need to play a deadly game of hide and seek. While the segment leading up to the dramatic event is uneventful, it is one of the few times the game feels comfortable enough to drop a bunch of lore tidbits on you. So overall, I enjoyed Sherry's segment far more than Ada's. They really could have done more with her considering the overall role in the story that Ada plays. Annette Birkin, Sherry's mom, shows up as well, and her character has taken a pretty dramatic shift from her origins. In the original game, Annette was often cast in the shadows of an antagonist of sorts, uncaring about those around her, and even using her daughter as a tool of sorts. In the remake, however, Annette is turned into a hyper-focused scientist bordering on obsession. While her treatment of her daughter may seem cruel, she's actually taking her role in the whole citywide pandemic very seriously, putting her own needs below those of millions that the virus stands to endanger. Birkin acts as one of the main antagonists of the game, unwillingly so though, as he is only known as G, the mutant created by the G virus. While we don't really get a lot of story with Birkin, it's mainly been changed again to make him a more sympathetic figure, putting all the blame down on Umbrella this time. Birkin's transformation into the G-Virus monster is spectacular, and like in the original game, we meet him in several stages of the transformation throughout the game. I especially enjoy the detail they put into him in his first stage, where during the conflict, we can see him often screaming for help. as he's slowly losing himself to the monster he will eventually become. While each transformation becomes more and more vicious than the last, one can't help but wonder if Birkin is still in there somewhere mentally. While his monstrous mutations keep taking a firmer hold on him physically and mentally, we can see that he has never truly lost, as with each encounter, we can actually see the shell of his former self somewhere in his evolved form. Kind of makes you feel bad for the guy, being trapped in his own body, unable to act of his own free will anymore. At least that's what I think. Anytime you're near encountering Birkin, the game makes it painfully obvious something's up, with plentiful ammo and healing items usually not far away. These warning signs always got me excited to see what new Cronenberg horror Birkin would show up to as next. Overall, I enjoyed the story arc for each playthrough, but I just wish they would have gone just a little bit deeper. We can only hope that when the Resident Evil 3 remake comes around, they can give us lorehounds a bone to chew on as well. I do hope that when we do get the Resident Evil 3 remake, which will be happening, I guarantee it, that they give the Nemesis the treatment he deserves. Now, I don't want this review to get too long in the tooth, as I think this game should be experienced and not just watched. It's a unique gem in the genre that has been on the brink of collapse for eons. It brings the best horror elements to the forefront and gives center stage to it rather than taking it off to the side. No more giant action set pieces. Everything in this game is set to scare the living hell out of you, and it does it well. I feel that the Resident Evil series has a great outlook ahead of it if Capcom can just keep focused on the horror aspects of the game and don't go back to Resident Evils 4, 5, and 6. Hopefully this would mean retconning a whole bunch of the future games as well, and less boulder punching, more tearing through the halls frantically avoiding unstoppable horrors. I really hope the sales of this game give Capcom the confidence to give this team that made this remake more to do with the series. The Resident Evil 2 remake stands on the top of the heap in my opinion. This is by far the best game in the franchise, dethroning the Resident Evil 1 remake, and even taking the newer Resident Evil 7 down a peg or two. This is how you do horror. This is how you do zombies, and this is how you do a remake. Do not sleep on this game. Even if you're skeptical, you owe it to yourself to experience this type of game, as we don't get them very often. Hey everyone, that's the end of my Resident Evil 2 remake review. Thanks for watching. I hope the shorter format works for you guys. I really didn't want to spoil too much of this game for you. As much as I would have liked to go on a deeper dive in the lore, the game really didn't support a full go-on lore walkthrough like I did with the original Resident Evil 2. If you like this video, do all the things, subscribe, comment, like, let me know what you guys thought of this masterwork of horror. Resident Evil 2 is amazing, full stop. Don't agree? Fight me!